All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been creating a series of videos based off of the Mozilla Developer Network's Learn Web Development series. I'm in the JavaScript portion, and we're in JavaScript First Steps. Time to learn more about variables. All right. In this article, as it says, we'll get down to the basics, looking at how to work with the most basic building blocks of JavaScript, those being variables. All right, so what is a variable? Now again, this is the author's definition, totally fine definition. It's a container for a value. I look at it that when you create a variable, it gets a location in memory, and it's the name of that location. So if I say let age equal 10, age is the name of the variable, and that memory location where that 10 is going to be stored, and it's not the number 10, it's the series of zeros and ones that represent 10 that the computer can understand, will be referenced by age. All right. One special thing about variables is their contained values can change. They can vary. That's why you've got the name. All right. So it says, what is your name? Jeff. Hi, Jeff. It's nice to meet you. I can run it again and say Bob. And it says, hi, Bob. It's nice to meet you. This is a variable. This is a constant. That is not changing. All right. So it says in this example, pressing the button runs a couple lines of code. The first popped up that message, that prompt dialog that said, what is your name? The second one popped up an alert. It says, to understand why this is so useful, let's think about what we'd have to do if we wrote this example without using a variable. It would end up looking more like this. And you'd have to put in basically every name there is, which would be really dumb. Again, as it says there, if we didn't have variables available, we'd have to implement a gigantic code block that checked what the entered name was and then display it for any name. This would not only be inefficient, it would probably be impossible to do. So variables, as it says there, just make sense. And the more you learn about JavaScript, the more they become second nature. Another special thing, and now this is one of the things that differentiates JavaScript from most other programming languages, and that is that when you create a variable, again, we've been using the word let, and you can put anything in a variable, and you can change the type of value that's in there. So I can say let name equal Jeff. Then later on in the program, I can say name equals 57. Then later on in the program, I can say name equal true. And this is because JavaScript is not what is known as a strongly typed language. So you can create a variable and then change it to something else if you want to. So it says variables aren't the values themselves, they're the containers for the values. When you do this, that's here or here, that's called a variable declaration. If I said let my name equal Jeff, the equal Jeff part would be equal double quote Jeff double quote, or equal single quote Jeff single quote. Then the equal part followed by the Jeff in double or single quotes, that would be the variable initialization. This is a declaration. So as it says, to use a variable, you first got to create it. More accurately, we call this creating or declaring the variable. In JavaScript, all these lines should end with semicolons. If for some reason they don't, typically JavaScript will put it in there for you, but it's a bad practice to get into because it doesn't always. So you should, as it says there, try to get into the habit of including them. Now it says you can test whether these now exist by just typing in the name of the variable. They don't have any value, but you don't get an error. If you do this, and you haven't created a variable by that name yet, you will get an error. All right. It says, don't confuse a variable that exists but has no defined value with one that doesn't exist at all. They're very different things. One that exists but doesn't have a value in there, it's either going to have a value, probably it'll say undefined if you try to use it, or possibly null. So once you declare a variable, you can initialize it. And you can initialize it in 2 steps, or you can initialize it in 1 step. It's your call. What is the advantage? If you already know the value, it makes sense to initialize it when you declare it. If you don't already know the value, then you probably will do it in 2 steps. Meaning you might initialize it later on in the program. Now, from what we've done so far, here's one of the more important sections. Back in the olden days, which means maybe 5, 10, 15, whatever years ago, when you created a variable, you used the word var. Var is not a good word. Var is a way that you can do, for lack of better words, sloppy programming. And it says, why do we have var and let? The reasons are basically historical. Back when JavaScript was first created, and I don't know when that was. So when was JavaScript created? 1995, not that long ago. 26 years ago? In September, so 25 and a half years ago? All right, so when it was first created, there was only var. As it says, it works fine in most cases, but it has issues in the way it works. It can be confusing, it can be annoying, it can be where it doesn't do what you think or want it to do. So it says a couple of the simple differences between var and let are explained below. It says we won't go into all the differences now, but you'll start to discover them. All right. So notice right here, we've got var my name. And we're already using it up here. But it works. And we said before that how can it do that? Don't we have to take that var my name and put it up here? And the answer is no. Because with var, it allows you to do something that's called hoisting, which means that you can use a variable before it's even been declared. That works with var, but notice hoisting does not work with let. If we changed var to let, you'd get an error. And as it says, that's a good thing, because using var can lead to sloppy programming. Second, when you use var, you can declare the same variable as many times as you want. So notice var my name equal Chris rather, var my name equal Bob. When you're done, it's got the last value, but you can do this. Using let, you're going to get an error. You have to use it without the word let. So again, using var can lead to confusion. And the recommendation is you don't use var ever for any reason. All right. Once a variable has been initialized with a value, you can change that value by giving it a different one. And there's an example. And again, this shows the fact that JavaScript is not a tightly, the language itself is very loose in that you can create a variable that's in one data type and you can put another type of data in there. All right. All right. And aside on variable naming rules, this is one of those things that, especially when you're first starting, it's better off to know where something like this is and look for it. Don't worry about memorizing it. All right. It says you can call a variable pretty much anything you like, but there are limitations. Generally, you should stick to letters and numbers and possibly the underscore character. I would say generally, if you stick to just letters, you'll be fine. All right. says you shouldn't use any other characters because they may be hard to understand for an international audience, and they may or may not be accepted by the system itself. Don't use underscores at the start of variable names. Don't use numbers at the start of variable names. All right, you don't use underscores because typically there are some built-in system variables that start with underscore. It's not that you'll get an error. It's just bad programming practice. Starting a variable name, the third bullet down there, starting a variable name with a number, not a special an underscore, but a number will give you an error. It says a safe thing is to stick to lower camel case. I use regular camel case. What does that mean? That means that if I'm going to come in here and create a variable, let's just say it's called tax rate. I will say let tax rate equal 0.27. The other way you can do it is like this. And you'll see both ways. Stick to one that you like. I would recommend this one because that's pretty much more standard in most programming languages. All right, but don't do this. That'll give you an error. That will give you an error. All right. Make variable names intuitive. So unless you're doing something where you're using a counter, where I use something like LCV, which again is actually intuitive. Okay. Don't use names like ABC or what they're saying. Single letters, numbers, or big long phrases. You could even argue with a thing what I had before, like number maximum guesses or whatever it was too big. Remember, variables are case sensitive. So my age, all in lowercase, is different from my age with an uppercase A. All right, finally, don't use JavaScript reserved words. Don't use reserved words as the name of your variables. Okay? So these are good examples. These are bad examples. Notice var here would be a bad example because it's a reserved word. All right, so what types of variables do you have available to you in JavaScript, period? You've got numbers. And there's just one number type. So whether it's got a whole number, just a whole number, meaning that it's an integer, or if it actually has decimals in it, which typically would be called a float or a double. They're just numbers. Strings we've already talked about must be either in double quotes or single quotes. If you start it with a single quote, you must end it with a single quote. If you start it with a double quote, you must end it with a double quote. So far we've got numbers and strings. Boolean are true, false. Quite often you'll see Boolean started with the word is to show that it's Boolean. Is married, true or false. Is union, true or false. All right. Arrays. An array is a single object that can contain multiple values. Now, you're probably going to find that confusing for right now. All right. But this is one variable, my name array, that's got 3 values. My name array 0 is Chris. My name array 1 is Bob. My name array 2 is Jim. My number array 0 is 10. My number array 1 is 15. My number array 2 is 40. If that doesn't make sense to you, just hold off because we will talk about it in a later class. Plus, as it says, you'll learn more about it in a future article. Okay. Objects. So here we're creating a brand new variable type. Its type is dog, and its values are name, which currently holds Spot, and breed, which currently holds Dalmatian. You can have a simple object or a complex object. So the way I would refer to the dog's name right there, if I wanted to change it, I'd say dog.name equal Rover, or dog.breed equal Golden Retriever, for example. All right. Dynamic typing. JavaScript, as mentioned here, is a dynamically typed language, meaning that unlike some other languages, you don't need to specify the data type. The system figures out that based on the fact that this is in single quotes, this must be a string. So must this. Now this, since it's not in double quotes, must be a number. You can find out what type of variable is currently being held in your variable. What type of value is being held in your variable by using the type of operator. Constants we've talked a little bit about. As it says, many programming languages have the concept of a constant. Once declared, it can't be changed. Now, in the earlier days of JavaScript, you couldn't have constants. You can now. I put my constants in uppercase. You don't have to do it. In fact, some JavaScript texts today will tell you not to do it. But I still do it because it's pretty much the accepted way in most languages to do it. All right, so that's it. We've now gone through the first 1, 2, 3, 4, and we've got, looks like 5 more to go here. So next we'll go into basic math, numbers and operators, and I'll be back with that shortly.